Your wife is still alive, the black girl said. The billionaire immediately launches an investigation. Richard Hale was a man who lived in the center of attention. Wherever he went, people whispered his name with awe. He was a billionaire, the head of one of the largest business empires in the country. From the outside, it looked as if he had everything: a fortune, power, respect, and influence that could open any door. But what people did not see was the emptiness in his heart. 2 years ago, he had lost the one person who gave meaning to his wealth: his wife, Elena. The news of her sudden death had shaken not just him, but also the world of business and high society. According to the reports, Elena had died in a tragic car accident. The vehicle was found badly burned, and though investigators claimed that the body inside matched her, Richard had never seen her face one last time. He was told that the remains were beyond recognition. A funeral was arranged, condolences were sent from every corner of the world, and life moved on. Or at least, the world expected Richard to move on. But he never did. Even after 2 years, every night when the house was quiet, he would sit in his study and look at her photographs. Elena had been his partner, not just in marriage but in vision. She had a way of calming his restless mind, grounding his ambitions, and making him believe that love mattered more than all the numbers in his bank account. She was his balance, his compass. Without her, Richard often felt like a man lost in his own palace. On the evening that changed everything, Richard was attending a charity gala. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, and the air was filled with polite laughter, the sound of glasses clinking, and music playing softly in the background. Richard had become used to such events. They were part of his image, part of his responsibilities. But he never truly enjoyed them anymore. Tonight was no different. He smiled politely, shook hands, and signed a check for the foundation. Inside, he was still empty. Then it happened. As he stood near the exit, preparing to leave, a young girl approached him. She looked no older than 20. Her skin was dark, her eyes steady but nervous, and her hands trembled as she clutched a small purse. At first, Richard assumed she wanted an autograph or perhaps a photograph, as often happened. But instead, she stepped close enough for only him to hear and whispered, "Your wife is still alive." Richard froze. He turned sharply to face her, certain he had misheard. The noise of the crowd faded from his mind, and all he could hear were those words, echoing again and again. His chest tightened. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice quieter than he expected. The girl looked frightened, as if she had revealed something she should not have. But she repeated, more firmly this time, "Your wife. She is alive." Richard's breath caught in his throat. For a moment, anger flared in him. How could anyone say something so cruel? Did she not know the weight of those words? He narrowed his eyes, ready to dismiss her as a misguided stranger. But there was something in her tone, in the way she looked directly into his eyes, that stopped him. It wasn't the look of someone lying. It was the look of someone carrying a heavy truth. "Who are you?" Richard demanded, trying to steady his voice. "My name is Amara," she said softly. "I know how it sounds. But I saw her. I saw Elena." The name hit him like a punch. Elena. He had not heard it spoken aloud by a stranger in so long. Everyone else had learned to tiptoe around it, to avoid reopening his wounds. But here was this young woman, speaking it as if it were alive, breathing, real. Amara quickly explained that she had seen Elena in a small coastal town far from the city. According to her, Elena lived quietly, under a different name, avoiding attention. Amara described how she noticed a woman who looked strikingly similar to the pictures of Elena she had once seen in magazines and articles. The woman carried herself with the same elegance, the same grace. And when Amara saw the small scar on her wrist exactly like the one Elena had from a childhood accident, she knew it was not just a resemblance. Richard's head spun. He wanted to walk away, to shut his ears, to pretend he hadn't heard. But his heart was no longer in his control. For 2 years he had begged for just one chance, one miracle, one sign that Elena might still be out there. And now, here it was, placed before him in the form of a trembling girl with fearless eyes. Still, his rational mind fought back. "That's impossible," he said firmly, though the words felt weak. "She died. I buried her." Amara shook her head. "You buried a story they gave you. But not her." The simplicity of her words cut through him like a blade. He opened his mouth to demand proof, to question her further, but before he could, Amara stepped back. "I've told you what I know," she said. "Whether you believe it or not, that is your choice. But I couldn't stay silent knowing the truth." And just like that, she slipped into the crowd and disappeared, leaving Richard standing there, stunned and speechless. That night, Richard could not sleep. He paced the length of his study, replaying every detail of what had happened. His mind screamed at him that it was foolish, that grief made men vulnerable to false hope. Yet his heart whispered that maybe, just maybe, Elena had never left him. He remembered the unanswered questions from the accident, the missing body, the vague explanations, the rushed funeral. He remembered how he had once thought it strange that no DNA test had ever been offered to him, but at the time, he was too broken to argue. Now those doubts returned, sharper than ever. What if Amara was right? What if Elena was out there, waiting, hoping, alive? The hours stretched on. Richard sat at his desk, staring at the framed photograph of his wife. Her smile seemed almost alive, almost as if she were urging him to listen, to not let the moment pass. By dawn, one thing was certain: he could no longer ignore the possibility. He had the power, the resources, and the determination. And if there was even the smallest chance that Elena was alive, he would find her. As the first light of morning touched the sky, Richard made a silent vow. He would uncover the truth, no matter how far he had to go, no matter how dangerous the path became. The words of the girl would not leave him. "Your wife is still alive." And for the first time in 2 years, Richard felt a spark of hope burning inside him. Richard spent the next several days in a restless state of mind. The words of the young girl would not leave him. He tried to carry on with his usual life: meetings, phone calls, appointments, and business lunches, but his focus was gone. Every time someone spoke to him, he found himself distracted, replaying the moment when Amara whispered the unbelievable. He had always considered himself a logical man, someone who trusted numbers and facts, not feelings or rumors. But this was different. This was Elena. At night, when the world around him was silent, his thoughts grew louder. He remembered the day of the accident. He had been away on a business trip in London when the call came. His chief of staff had told him in a trembling voice that Elena's car had been discovered off the highway. The fire had consumed most of the vehicle, and by the time police reached the site, it was too late. Richard had flown back immediately, heartbroken, and was shown only photographs of the wreckage. No body was ever shown to him, just a closed casket at the funeral. At the time, he had been too crushed by grief to question it. Everyone told him it was best not to see her in such a state. They said it would only give him more pain. So, he had believed them. Now those memories returned with a sharpness that made his chest ache. Why had he never asked harder questions? Why had he not demanded a DNA test? Why did he simply accept the story given to him when everything else in his life he had always verified himself? The possibility that Elena might still be alive was like a flame that grew brighter each hour. Still, Richard knew he could not run blindly after hope. Hope was dangerous when it was not supported by facts. He decided he needed to examine everything carefully. He began by reading through the old accident files again. Sitting alone in his office late into the night, he opened every report, every photograph, every statement. He noticed things he had not noticed before. Some documents were vague, some details strangely incomplete. The medical examiner's report did not include clear identification beyond assumptions. The official statements from the investigators seemed rushed. It was as if someone had wanted the case closed quickly, without questions. The more Richard read, the more uneasy he became. Still, he fought with himself. It could all mean nothing. People often imagined patterns where there were none. He told himself that grief could trick a man into believing impossible things. Yet each time he tried to dismiss the thought, Amara's voice returned to him calm, steady, certain. I saw her. I saw Elena. Richard found himself seeking out the girl again. He contacted the organizers of the charity gala, asking if they had a list of volunteers or attendees who matched her description. It took time, but eventually, he managed to get a phone number. When he finally spoke to Amara again, she was nervous, almost afraid. I should not have told you, she admitted. I just could not carry it inside anymore. I know what I saw. I saw her in a small town near the coast. She was different, quieter, but it was her. The scar on her wrist, the way she hummed a lullaby when she thought no one was listening, I will never forget it. Richard's heart raced as she described these details. The scar on Elena's wrist was something only someone close would know. She had gotten it as a child when she fell from a swing. And the lullaby, yes, it was one Elena always hummed when she was in the garden. The girl could not have known that from newspapers or magazines. Why didn't you come sooner? Richard asked gently. Amara hesitated. Because I was afraid. The people around her looked protective. Like they didn't want anyone to know who she was. I thought if I spoke up, it might put her in danger. But I could not stay silent forever. Her words were both a gift and a burden. Richard thanked her and promised that he would be careful. When the call ended, he sat in silence for a long while. He now knew one thing with certainty: he had to investigate. He could no longer allow doubt to eat away at him. The next morning, Richard summoned two of his most trusted men, people who had worked with him not just in business but in matters requiring absolute secrecy. One was a retired intelligence officer, the other a private detective known for his discretion. Richard explained the situation without giving too much detail, only that he had reason to believe his wife's death might not have been what it seemed. I don't want rumors. I don't want half-truths, Richard said firmly. I want proof. Find out everything you can about that night, about the investigation, and about where she might be now. Work quietly. No one else can know. They nodded, understanding the weight of his request. For them, it was not just another assignment, it was a matter of loyalty to the man who trusted them with his most private pain. In the days that followed, Richard lived between hope and fear. The investigators began digging into records, speaking to contacts, and examining details that had been overlooked. They discovered that the accident site photographs showed inconsistencies: the angle of the crash, the marks on the road, even the timing of when the fire was reported. None of it added up perfectly. Then came the most unsettling discovery. Months after Elena's supposed death, a bank account linked to her name had been quietly reactivated. A small amount of money had been withdrawn in a coastal town, far from the city. When Richard heard this, his heart skipped a beat. It was the first solid sign that pointed to the possibility Amara had not lied. His mind raced with questions. If Elena had truly been alive all this time, why had she not come back to him? What had kept her away? And who had arranged the false story of her death? Late at night, Richard sat once more in front of Elena's photograph. He traced her smile with his eyes and whispered to the empty room, "If you are out there, I will find you. I promise." For the first time in years, his heart carried not just grief but determination. The man who had built an empire through discipline and vision now turned that same power toward a single goal: to uncover the truth about his wife. And deep inside, though he would not admit it aloud, he already believed what Amara had told him. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Richard had experienced before. For the first time since the supposed death of his wife, he felt a strange mixture of fear and hope guiding his every move. His team of investigators worked silently but tirelessly, feeding him details bit by bit. Each discovery felt like pulling on a loose thread of a tightly woven fabric. The more they pulled, the more it began to unravel. One evening, his detective, Samuel, placed a folder on his desk. Richard opened it with impatient hands. Inside were photographs, reports, and witness statements from the original accident investigation. "Look closely," Samuel said in his calm, steady voice. Richard studied the photos once again, the burned wreckage, the twisted metal, the scorched earth around the crash site. But then Samuel pointed to something. "Do you see the tire marks? They don't match the car she was driving. The width is different, the pattern is wrong. It suggests another vehicle was involved, one never reported in the official case." Richard's chest tightened. "Are you telling me this wasn't just an accident?" Samuel nodded. "It looks staged. And whoever filed the report didn't bother to mention the second vehicle. Either it was overlooked, or it was covered up." That night, Richard sat alone in his study, the documents spread before him like puzzle pieces. He had always believed the world of business was ruthless, filled with lies and manipulations. But he had never imagined such a thing touching the most personal part of his life. If Elena had not died in that car, then where had she gone? And who had benefited from her disappearance? The second piece of information came only days later. His other investigator, Marcus, returned from the coastal town Amara had mentioned. Marcus had traveled there quietly, pretending to be nothing more than a passing visitor. "I asked around," he reported. "Most people didn't want to talk. But a few described a woman who matches Elena's description: slender, graceful, always quiet, and always looking over her shoulder as if afraid. They said she rented a small house by the sea and kept mostly to herself. They called her Nora." Richard's heart raced at the name. Nora. A new identity. A false life. It was both painful and comforting. Painful that she had been forced to hide, but comforting that she had managed to survive. Marcus slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a blurred photograph, taken from a distance. Richard's hands trembled as he held it. The picture was not perfect. The woman's face was turned slightly away, her hair partly covering her features, but Richard knew. Even in that blurred outline, he recognized the shape of her face, the curve of her shoulders. It was Elena. His Elena. For a long moment, he could not breathe. The air felt thick around him, his heart thundering. He wanted to believe with all his soul, but doubt still whispered. What if it was just someone who looked like her? What if his grief was making him see what he wanted? He pressed the photo to his chest and closed his eyes. Deep inside, he knew it was her. That night he barely slept. He kept thinking of all the details Amara had mentioned: the scar on the wrist, the lullaby. And now there was the photograph. Too many signs pointed in the same direction. The next morning, he made a decision. He would go himself. He could no longer sit in his office, waiting for others to bring him answers. He needed to see, to feel, to know with his own eyes whether his wife was alive. The journey to the coastal town was planned carefully. Richard went without publicity, using a false name and traveling with only Marcus for protection. He dressed simply, trying to blend in. It felt strange for a man used to private jets, bodyguards, and boardroom meetings to suddenly live like a traveler with no attention on him. But he welcomed it. This was personal. This was about Elena. When he arrived, the town was smaller than he expected. It sat quietly by the sea, its streets narrow, its houses weathered by the salt air. Fishermen worked on their boats, children played near the shore, and life seemed untouched by the noise of the big cities. Richard walked slowly, taking everything in. Every face he passed, he searched for hers. Every voice he heard, he listened for the one that could never be mistaken. He began asking small questions, pretending to be curious about the area. Some locals shrugged, uninterested. But one elderly shopkeeper gave him a long look. "You're asking about the quiet woman?" she asked cautiously. Richard's pulse quickened. "Yes. A woman who lives alone by the sea." The woman nodded slowly. "She came here 2 years ago. She doesn't speak much. Keeps to herself. But kind, very kind. Always buys food for the stray cats. Some say she's hiding from someone. We don't ask questions." Richard thanked her, his throat tight. He wanted to run straight to Elena that moment, but he forced himself to stay calm. He could not risk scaring her away if she truly was in hiding. That evening, Marcus returned with more news. "I found the house," he said quietly. "It matches what the girl said. Small, by the edge of the cliffs. She doesn't go out much, but when she does, she always wears a scarf and sunglasses, even in the evenings. She's careful." Richard's hands clenched. "She's protecting herself." "Yes," Marcus agreed. "Or she's being protected by someone else." The thought chilled Richard. If Elena was hiding, was it by her own choice? Or was she being kept away from him by force? He had to know. Later that night, Richard went alone to the edge of the cliffs where the house stood. He stayed in the shadows, his heart pounding as he looked at the dim light glowing from inside. Through the window, he saw a figure moving gently about. Though the distance was too great to see her face clearly, something deep inside him recognized the way she moved, the way she tilted her head. It was Elena. He was sure of it now. Tears stung his eyes. For the first time in years, he saw her alive before him. He wanted to run forward, to call her name, to hold her. But he forced himself to wait. If she had been hiding all this time, there was a reason. He needed to understand why before he revealed himself. When he returned to his inn that night, Richard sat in silence, the sound of the ocean waves echoing outside. He was filled with more questions than answers. Why had she never contacted him? What danger had kept her away? Who was behind this disappearance? One thing was certain: this was no longer just a mystery. It was a conspiracy. The pieces of the puzzle pointed toward powerful forces that had shaped the lie of her death. And Richard, a man who had fought his way to the top of the business world, now knew he must fight an even greater battle. He whispered into the night, "Hold on, Elena. I will bring you home." Richard could not forget the sight of the woman in the small house by the cliffs. Even from a distance, he knew it was Elena. His heart told him what his eyes had seen. She was alive, and she had been living quietly, hidden away from the world. But why? That was the question that would not leave him. He had waited years for answers, and now that he was close, patience became the hardest thing. He wanted to rush to her door, call her name, and hold her in his arms. But his mind warned him to be careful. Something bigger was at play. The next morning, Marcus handed him a report. "I've been asking discreetly. People say she's not alone. She has a man who visits her often. He's not a husband, not a brother, but someone who protects her. They say he looks like security." Richard's stomach tightened. Security? Who hired him? "That's the strange part," Marcus continued. "The locals don't know much. But one fisherman told me he once overheard a conversation. The man was warning Elena to stay indoors, that people might be searching for her. It wasn't just about safety, it sounded like they were hiding her from someone powerful." Richard's mind raced. Why would anyone hide Elena from him, her own husband? Who would gain from her disappearance? His thoughts immediately went to his business empire. In the 2 years since her supposed death, his rivals had grown bolder, his board members more controlling. Elena had been his anchor, his partner in every decision. Without her, he had been weaker, more vulnerable. Could it be that her death had been staged to hurt him, to unbalance him? The idea filled him with rage, but also clarity. He needed proof. That night, he decided to confront Amara again. She had risked herself by telling him the truth. Perhaps she knew more. They met quietly in a cafe far from the city, where no one would recognize them. Amara looked nervous, glancing over her shoulder as if she feared being followed. "I told you all I knew," she said softly. "Not everything," Richard pressed gently. "You lived near her, didn't you? You saw her more than once. You must have heard things. Please, Amara, I need to know why she's hiding." Amara hesitated, biting her lip. Finally, she spoke. "She told me little. But I remember one night. She was crying. She said she could never go back to the life she once had because it would put the man she loved in danger. She didn't say your name, but I knew. She meant you. She said powerful people wanted to destroy everything connected to you, and if they knew she was alive, they would use her as a weapon." Richard's hands trembled as he listened. The pieces were coming together. Elena hadn't left him out of choice. She had hidden to protect him. His grief had blinded him to the truth, but now he could see clearly. "Do you know who these people are?" he asked. Amara shook her head. "No. But I know she was afraid. Not of strangers. Afraid of people close to you. She said betrayal always comes from within." Her words hit him like a storm. Betrayal from within. Richard thought of his board, his trusted circle, even his oldest business partner, Daniel Cross. Daniel had been by his side for decades, helping him build his empire. But in recent years, Richard had noticed subtle changes. Daniel had pushed him toward certain deals, insisted on certain partnerships, and often reminded him that he was alone now. Richard had brushed it off as concern. Now he wondered if it had been control. The thought sickened him. If Daniel or others close to him had been part of Elena's disappearance, then the betrayal ran deeper than he imagined. That evening, Richard returned to his office and locked the door. He pulled out years of financial records, agreements, and contracts. He began tracing the timeline from the day of Elena's supposed death. What he saw unsettled him. Right after her funeral, Daniel had pushed through a deal Richard had been reluctant to approve. It had benefited Daniel more than anyone else. Other board members had gained power during Richard's period of grief. While he was drowning in sorrow, they had been strengthening their hold. It became clearer. Someone had wanted Elena gone to weaken him. The more Richard thought, the stronger his resolve grew. He could no longer wait on the sidelines. He had to confront the truth directly. The next day, he returned to the coastal town with Marcus. They stayed hidden, watching the house from a distance. Hours passed until finally, they saw him, a tall man in a dark coat, arriving at Elena's door. He knocked softly, and she let him in. For a moment, Richard caught a glimpse of her face in the doorway. It was Elena. Alive, breathing, real. His heart surged with emotion. He nearly rushed forward, but Marcus held him back. "Not yet," Marcus whispered. "If that man is protecting her, barging in now could ruin everything." Richard nodded reluctantly. He watched the light inside the house flicker through the evening. He imagined her moving about, just as she used to in their home. He ached to hold her, to hear her voice, to tell her she was no longer alone. But he forced himself to wait. He needed to know the full truth before revealing himself. That night, he planned his next move. He would uncover the names of those who orchestrated this. He would expose them and protect Elena once and for all. He called Samuel, the intelligence officer, and gave him a new order: investigate Daniel Cross and the rest of the board. Look into every connection, every secret, every hidden partnership. If they had a hand in this, Richard said, his voice steady with rage, I want to know. In the days that followed, Samuel's reports confirmed Richard's fears. Daniel had ties to a group of competitors who had long envied Richard's empire. Together, they had arranged deals that benefited them at his expense. The more Samuel uncovered, the clearer it became: Elena's disappearance had been part of their plan. Without her influence and sharp mind, Richard had been easier to manipulate. The betrayal cut deep. Daniel, the man he had trusted like a brother, had stabbed him in the back. And Elena, the woman he loved, had paid the price by vanishing into the shadows. Richard knew it was time for confrontation. He returned once more to the cliffs, but this time not as a silent observer. He stood outside the small house, his heart pounding. He knocked softly, and when the door opened, his world stopped. There she was. Elena. Her eyes widened, her hand covering her mouth as tears filled her eyes. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them carried 2 years of pain, longing, and unanswered questions. Richard whispered, his voice breaking, "It's me. You don't have to hide anymore." Elena shook her head, trembling. "Richard, you shouldn't be here. They'll come for you if they know." "They already came," Richard said firmly. "They tried to take you from me. But I found you. And now, I will protect you." Tears streamed down her cheeks as she reached for him. For the first time in years, Richard held her, feeling her warmth, her heartbeat against his chest. The world around them faded. In that moment, only their love remained. But even as he held her, Richard knew the battle was far from over. Those who had staged her death were still out there. And he would not rest until every one of them was brought to justice. The moment Richard held Elena in his arms, time seemed to stop. For 2 years, he had lived with the pain of believing she was gone, and now here she was alive, trembling, and crying against his chest. He could feel her heartbeat racing, could smell the faint scent of her hair, could hear the soft sound of her sobs. For a while, he said nothing, afraid that even speaking might shatter the miracle before him. Elena finally pulled back just enough to look into his eyes. Her face was thinner, her skin paler, but her eyes were the same, the eyes that had once guided him through every storm. "I thought I would never see you again," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You should never have been taken from me," Richard said firmly. "They told me you were gone. I buried an empty coffin. All this time, I thought I had lost you." Her lips trembled as she shook her head. "I wanted to come back. Every day, I wanted to. But they made it clear if I returned to you, you would be destroyed. They wanted to break you through me. And I couldn't let that happen." Richard's jaw tightened. "Who are they, Elena? Who did this to you?" Elena's eyes filled with pain as she spoke. "Your business partners. The ones you trusted. They came to me weeks before the accident. They warned me that if I didn't disappear, they would ruin everything you had built. They wanted you weak, vulnerable, easy to control. When I refused, they staged the accident. I barely escaped. A man loyal to them brought me here, said I had no choice but to hide." Richard closed his eyes, rage surging inside him. The betrayal was even deeper than he had imagined. Daniel Cross, his oldest partner, had orchestrated it all. The man he had considered a brother had forced his wife into exile, all for power and greed. But as he held Elena's hand, Richard also felt something stronger than anger. He felt purpose. For 2 years, his life had been covered in darkness. Now, with Elena alive, he had light again. And with that light, he would fight. "Listen to me," he said, gripping her hands. "You are not going to hide anymore. I will not let them control our lives. We are going to face them together. They wanted me weak without you. But with you, Elena, I am stronger than ever. She looked at him with tears in her eyes. It won't be easy. They have power, connections, money, so do I, Richard interrupted gently. And I have something they never will. I have the truth. I have you. In the days that followed, Richard arranged for Elena's safety. Marcus and Samuel secured a hidden location where she could stay until the confrontation was over. Richard promised her he would come back for her once everything was exposed. Leaving her again was the hardest thing he had ever done, but he knew it was necessary. He returned to the city with a new fire in his heart. He was no longer the grieving man his rivals believed him to be. He was a man on a mission. He began gathering evidence, piecing together the lies Daniel and the others had told. Samuel traced financial transfers, bribes, and hidden accounts. Marcus collected testimonies from people who had been silenced before. Bit by bit, the conspiracy unfolded in front of Richard like a rotten fruit split open. Finally, the day came for confrontation. Richard called for a private board meeting. The room was filled with the most powerful men in his empire, men who had smiled at his grief while stealing from him behind closed doors. Daniel sat at the head of the table, his expression calm, confident, as if he still held all the strings. Richard entered with a quiet strength. He carried no anger on his face, only determination. When the meeting began, Daniel cleared his throat. "Richard, what is this about? You called us all here urgently. Is something wrong?" "Yes," Richard said, his voice steady. "Something has been wrong for 2 years. And today, it ends." He laid out the evidence one piece at a time. The false accident reports, the financial deals pushed through after Elena's disappearance, the hidden bank accounts, the witnesses who confirmed she had been forced into hiding. The room grew silent. One by one, the men's faces drained of color. Daniel tried to interrupt, but Richard silenced him with a single look. "You thought I would never find out," Richard said. "You thought grief would blind me forever. But you underestimated 2 things: my love for Elena, and the truth. She is alive. And she told me everything." The room exploded in shock. Daniel's mask slipped for the first time, his composure breaking. "You don't understand," he tried to argue. "It was for the good of the company." "The company?" Richard's voice rose for the first time. "You destroyed my life, tore my wife from me, and left me broken, all for your greed. And you dare call it business?" Silence followed, heavy and sharp. Richard looked around the table. "Every one of you who played a part in this will answer for it. I will not stop until justice is done." From that day forward, Richard launched a campaign not just of emotion but of strategy. He brought in lawyers, investigators, and law enforcement. Evidence was handed over, cases were built. Slowly but surely, Daniel and his allies began to fall. Their reputations crumbled, their wealth slipped away, and their power dissolved. The empire they tried to steal was reclaimed piece by piece. Throughout it all, Richard kept Elena safe. When the storm finally cleared, when the guilty were exposed and punished, he returned to her. This time, he did not have to hide his joy. They stood together on the balcony of their home, the city lights stretching out before them. Elena leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "It feels like a dream," she whispered. "It's real," Richard said softly. "I lost you once, and I will never let it happen again." Elena smiled through her tears. "You found me when I thought I was lost forever." He kissed her forehead gently. "No matter how far you were, my heart always knew you were alive. And now, we will live again together." The pain of the past 2 years could not be erased, but it became a shadow compared to the light of their reunion. Richard knew the road ahead would still have challenges. But with Elena by his side, nothing seemed impossible anymore. And as they stood hand in hand, he silently thanked the brave young girl, Amara, whose courage had brought him back the greatest gift of his life, the truth. For Richard and Elena, the nightmare was over. What lay ahead was a new beginning, built not on wealth or power, but on love that had survived even the darkest storm. White heavy checkmark word count, 1315, emotional, suspenseful, and ending with hope and resolution.